And now it's my honor to present our two presenters, Cindy Oser and Leticia Lara. Cindy and Leticia are both with the Western Office of 0 to 3 in Los Angeles and are partners of the Early Learning with Families initiative. Cindy is the director of the 0 to 3 office, and Leticia is the regional manager. Both Cindy and Leticia have spent many years consulting early learning professionals and families on effective programming, creating policy, and actually delivering training. So it's my pleasure to introduce Cindy and Leticia.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you all of you for joining us this afternoon for the webcast. Leticia and I will be doing some presentation, and I'm going to invite Leticia, as she'd like to jump in. So we'll be trying to make this a dialogue. I know that even though we're at a distance, I hope that you'll feel close to us through this webcast. And I want to start by saying that you are engaged in very important work with families and very young children. And as you'll find out through the webcast today, the work that you do in engaging families is the work of supporting early learning, because young children only learn through relationships, and we would probably say that those parents are gaining through the relationships as well. So just want to acknowledge the very important work that you're doing, very often under with very few resources, and so we hope that one of the things that we'll be able to do with you today is share some additional resources that you can use in your toolkits. Just a word about 0 to 3, the organization. We work for a national nonprofit organization that for the last 30-some years has focused entirely on promoting the health and development of infants, toddlers, and their families. And so we hope that you'll be able to visit our website. There are materials there that you can download free of charge for families, for yourselves to use, and if you have the chance, there are materials to look at where you may be even interested in changing policy. So please take a look at your website when we have a chance. All right, let's get started. What we're going to do today is share with you some information about the scientific basis of early relationships, what's going on in the brain through early relationships, how the brain is physically changing, and what that means for setting up children and families to be motivated, successful learners for the rest of their lives. We have shared some resources that are available to you, and we also want to allow a chance for you to ask some questions, but also leave you with some questions that you might want to think about after the webcast is over. So by the end of this hour, we hope that you'll be able to describe the importance of early relationships, explore several ways to engage families in supporting early learning, and identify at least 2 new resources on engaging families. Now, let's jump right in with the science of early brain development. And I'm sure that you've all seen pictures of the neurons and the synapses that are forming in an infant's brain, so that from the very earliest moments of life, the brain is developing. And what happens at first is that there is tremendously rapid growth going on in that brain. When we're born, we already have hundreds of thousands of neurons. But in those early years, experiences and genes work together to allow the brain to sort out all of the neurons and connections that that are being used, and to get rid of the ones that are not being used. So it's a real process of pruning and sorting. And what's happening in those early years is that the brain is building the architecture, if you will, the foundation for how we react and respond to situations and circumstances for the rest of our lives. And of course, we want that foundation to be as strong as possible. Many children are growing up in environments and having experiences that do not allow a strong foundation to be built. And of course, because our neurons and our skills are built over time, it is possible to remediate and to correct a lack of experience or some really stressful circumstances. However, we know it's much more expensive, it's much more difficult to change and to have to shore up a weak foundation. So our goal is to make those early years as positive as possible and as beneficial as possible for young children's brain development. The other thing that I want to point out is that our capacity to change decreases with age. Of course, none of us would be here today if we thought we couldn't learn something new. But it's much harder, as any of you who've tried to learn a language when you're older, it's possible, but it's very difficult. So again, if we can get the early years off to a good start, we've saved ourselves a lot of energy and time and made it much easier for the learning to begin. The other thing about, even though we're talking about early brain development in children, let's think about the parents also being on a learning curve. You will find that your customers are parents of very young children. They may be first-time parents, or they may be on their, they may be veteran parents. But regardless, they are also on a developmental continuum with their parenting skills. And so you're both building skills in children and children's learning, and you're also helping parents do their part to navigate and support that early learning. This slide shows that the way that our brains develop is dependent on early experiences as well as what we're genetically and biologically set up to do. So the skills that we're learning at an early age vary, and it used to be that we thought that there were sensitive periods for different kinds of skills that we learn that open and shut very dramatically and very, very suddenly. But we now know that there are very few circumstances where the window of opportunity is only open for a limited time period. So let's look at, for instance, our vision and our hearing. So that's one of the first sets of skills that we begin to learn as infants. And that we are biologically programmed to develop vision and hearing. We need that for survival. And of course, those are the first things that we need. We need to be tuned into our environment. But we know from the brain research that, for instance, most infants now, when they're born, go through some kind of a hearing screening. And that's done so that we can detect problems with hearing at a very early age, because we know that the window of opportunity to develop hearing closes much more dramatically after 9 months. So we want to pick up hearing impairment early and either supplement it with aids or other communication skills before we lose the ability to activate those genes and those brain pathways and use our hearing skills. Same with vision. We need our vision at an early age, but what we know mostly from animal research, but also in very young children who were born with cataracts, if we don't remove the cataracts, or in typical children provide an opportunity to use our vision and develop our vision, after the first few months of age, we lose our ability, even if we have all of the physical structures in place, we lose our ability to meaningfully translate what we see into vision that makes sense in our brains. So vision and hearing do have critically sensitive windows of opportunity activated by experience, and that tells the genes what to do and how to lay down the wiring in those areas. Now, if we look at language development comes next. And young children in those early years are trying to make sense of the sounds that they hear. But again, if they're not exposed to words, if they're not exposed to sounds through singing and storytelling and rhymes, they're going to lose the ability to make sense of symbols, language, words, and eventually it'll make it much, much more difficult for them to learn to read. So of course, young children, it's much easier for them to learn languages, to pick up different sounds. And you've probably heard the research about the more that mothers talk to children, the larger the vocabularies. And that is true. So again, it's a matter of us being biologically programmed to learn language at early ages, but the more varied the vocabularies we hear, the better. Recently, I read a new study that said that the mothers who talk more do have children with larger vocabularies. But they also found that mothers who knew something about child development and could alter the way that they interacted and spoke to their children and varied it according to their children's temperaments, their interests, and their developmental level. They were assisting their children in developing the language and communication and cognitive skills. So you get an added bonus. So it's not just rattling on and on with your children, but the mothers who are more tuned into child development really help that language bloom and blossom and grow. The cognitive skills come next, and again, we are biologically set up to learn because we have to learn in order to survive. But we have to practice those skills and be exposed to experiences that allow us to practice our thinking and decision-making skills in order to really make the most of that. And you'll see from this slide that though the development of cognitive skills lasts many, many more years than the sensory and the language learning. The other thing I want to point out is now that you know where these windows of opportunities occur, you can adapt the activities that you're presenting to parents and children in the library according to the ages of the children that come in. So for instance, if you're sharing books with babies, you're not going to focus so much on their decision-making skills, their thinking skills, or even their language skills at that point. You're going to be expecting babies and books to interact in a very sensory way. Babies are going to want to chew on the books and turn them over and turn them upside down and flip the pages just to see what happens. And over time, parents can add the language component. So it's not so important that they tell the whole story, but that they point out things about the story, and so that the children start connecting words with pictures and assigning meaning and really learning to read the world. So this notion of the brain developing over time and being dependent on experiences holds true in different skill areas. So let's talk a minute about those early experiences. As I said, early experiences work hand in hand with genes. In other words, we've put aside the nature versus nurture argument. It is both things working together. Early experiences, because the brain is developing so rapidly at this point, the brain is taking in both positive and negative experiences. And it's not just a single episode of having a great experience with early learning or one bad experience. It's repeated exposure determining the impact over time. And early experiences also lay the foundation not only for future learning and future development. We call it scaffolding, where the brain builds on the basic skills and gets more and more complex over time. But we also know that early experiences set us up for both adolescent behavior and adult physical health and wellness. So in a large-scale study conducted by Kaiser Permanente called ACEs, or the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, they found that individuals who were exposed during childhood to a whole range of vulnerabilities, growing up in households where there was abuse and neglect, or parents who used drugs or alcohol, or very chaotic, very low income situations. Not only was the learning affected, and of course those children had poorer school success, but as adolescents, they tended to engage in riskier behaviors, drug and alcohol and so on. And as adults, individuals who had had those adverse early childhood life experiences, those were predictive of the top 10 adult reasons for death and disability: cardiac disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, and so on. So we see this link between early experiences to both learning, development, but also physical health. And generally speaking, those early experiences are helping infants and toddlers learn to read the world in many, many ways. All right, let's move on to the next slide. I want to talk for a moment about stress, because this is, we now describe stress on a continuum of ranging from normal stress that we all need on a day-to-day basis, whether we like it or not, to survive and grow. Stress pushes us to survive. in our most basic animal ways, so that if you're in a dangerous situation, it's stress that makes our heart beat a little faster, makes us breathe a little faster to get more oxygen in, prepares us to either flee the situation, to fight to overcome it, or withdraw for protection. So that's normal, typical stress. Generally what happens is our heart rate goes up. Maybe you were stuck in traffic this morning. Your heart rate went up, you're late for work, but once you get to work, you calm down. Everything's fine. That's good. Because during that normal stress, it made you focused, and you were focused on the issue at hand. The middle of the range of stress are very isolated but very highly stressful circumstances. So we think right now of the people in the Midwest who are facing really devastating flooding. But that's a point in time that because our body is so able to cope and deal with stress, they're going to get through that, and they will remember that. And in fact, they will remember it with great clarity, but again, they will recover from that circumstance. But now let's think of a situation where there's chronic toxic stress. And let's think of a child who might be exposed every single day to multiple vulnerabilities. We call that toxic stress. And it's toxic, especially to the developing brain, because stress raises our cortisol levels. Our brains are bathed in cortisol. And the result of that you see very graphically on this slide. So this is a PET scan of two brains. The one on the left is a normal, healthy brain. The one on the right is the brain of a child who was raised under highly deprived circumstances in a Romanian orphanage. The healthy brain, you can see, is all lit up. The orange and the red and the yellow areas are areas of high activity in the brain. And the areas that are circled are the areas that control emotions and sensory input. And as we said, our senses are the things that, in times of stress, we're keenly aware of our surroundings through our vision and our hearing. So the senses is what really keeps us tuned into the stress. And you can see that those are well lit up. So a typical healthy brain has lots of activity all over. Let's move to the brain on the right. This is the brain of a child who was raised under those really toxic circumstances. And you can see on this graphic the effects of that circumstance. The toxic stress has not allowed the brain to grow, so it's smaller in size. It has more fluid-filled cavities where there is no activity at all. And in the two areas of the brain that have to do with emotions and senses, there's not much activity at all. So what you see in these children is that their emotions are dampened. They're practically non-existent. These children might look non-reactive. They show very little emotion. They've basically withdrawn because they have not had the early experience to activate that part of their brain. The other thing that you'll notice about these children that you can see on their brains is the areas of their brain that have to do with decision making are also not well developed. So they've not developed the ability to self-regulate, to have self-control. They're unmotivated, and you can imagine what these children are like in a learning situation. They have very little capacity to be motivated for learning, and they don't respond well to the typical motivators that we would find, the positive emotion from other people, the pleasure of learning. And so the good news is that we can recreate and bolster. Remember, these are children now who have a weak architecture. We can rewire, we can build up that foundation, but it's going to be much more difficult, much more time consuming, and probably involve some pretty intensive therapies for these children to relearn and develop new parts of the brain that will help build those skills. So we're talking about toxic stress and how we can bolster the sturdy foundation. So a key message here is that relationships are a type of early experience that we now know are the active ingredients of brain development. And so your role in engaging parents and helping build relationships means that you are adding the active ingredient that will activate brain development. because as I said, we all come genetically ready, genetically primed to develop, but they need those early experiences. And there are a couple important points about this. First of all, adults mediate all early experiences for babies and toddlers. We are unique as human beings in that we have a much, much longer dependency period than any other animal. And so that's why we have to bond. That's why we have to attach to adults in our lives. That's also why babies are genetically programmed to be so darn cute. They are programmed to draw us in with their smiles and their expressions and their eyes. They draw us in so that we can attach to them, we can bond with them, because they're completely dependent on us for survival. But beyond that, adults mediate all other early experiences as well, the positive ones and the negative ones. So we have to attach for survival. But we also know that learning in infants and toddlers only occurs through relationships. So for instance, there are any number of educational videos, educational programs on television for very young children. But what the research tells us is very young children don't actively learn from that media. They need an adult to be with them, to experience it with them, to talk about it with them, for there to be a give and take. So it's the relationship that adds the active ingredient to learning, especially through inanimate or the media, the television, where they don't automatically have a give and take, a responsive learning experience. So the good news is that we can mediate those kinds of experience for babies and toddlers. The other thing that experience and relationships do is that it motivates learning. We get a lot of motivation. If I trust you, you tend to trust me back. If you're positive, I tend to be positive back. And if you're engaging, I tend to be engaging back. And that is, that's the plus side of a relationship. But there's also something chemical going on that actually alters the physical way that our brain develops. So again, what's happening in the brain is that it's laying the wiring and sorting out what we don't need and what we're going to keep. And in animal studies, they've found that adult behavior, the adult apes, for example, that are parenting the young apes in the group, that anxiety is one of the things that is genetically transmitted. And so some of the young apes have an anxious temperament. They're nervous, they're on edge. If they're on edge, they're really not really good group members. And that whole culture depends on how well the group works together. But what they found is that adults, the best parent adults in the group, go in and mediate that anxious behavior. They help calm down. They help the young ones learn how to calm themselves down. And so what they see in future generations is that anxiety gene, if you will, becomes altered. And they see less and less and less of that over time if the parents are mediating the anxious behavior. Now, we don't know for sure what that's like in adult humans, but we do know that supportive relationships can buffer that toxic stress that we talked about just a minute ago, so that parents who adopt children who have been raised in those very toxic stress situations really can do wonders in helping children unlearn and relearn new skills, coping, self-control, good decision-making, put back in the motivation and the curiosity they need to learn. But supportive relationships can also buffer biological vulnerabilities like prematurity. So a baby that's born very, very small, very low birth weight, or very premature, if they have supportive parents who are responsive to their needs and balance that give and take, that actually supports the biological prematurity factors. They gain weight faster, their body temperature is regulated faster, they learn how to regulate their own physiological functions faster. So it's really an amazing thing that something that seems emotional, like a relationship, can actually have a permanent physical effect on the way the brain develops and our future health and development. And you could be one of those important relationships by helping build relationships with both the parents, the other caregivers that come into your libraries, and the children as well. So we wanted to spend a minute talking about how relationships differ from interactions, because over the course of the day, you have many, many interactions that are not relationships. For instance, let's think back to that traffic jam we were in on the way to work this morning. Those are interactions. And you may have a brief emotional connection, probably not very positive, with the driver in front of you or behind you. But you have not formed an emotional connection that endures over time. You may have had some positive or negative feelings, but the memory of that doesn't conjure those up for you over time. Relationships have special meaning between two people, and they do create memories and expectations in the minds of the people involved. And because you're connecting with people at their most basic parenting relationship, it's going to conjure up memories of the values that they picked up and the way that they were parented themselves.
So Cindy,
yes.
as you're saying about the importance of relationships and the importance of the memories, both present and past, and an ongoing layer of memories. Can you think back of your experience of the library, given that this is our audience, of what those memories brought for you?
I do, and I was thinking about that, and for me, it was my father who really created in me the memory of what it was like to go to the library and how that felt for me. So he was a voracious reader, and every Friday night I would go to the library and get him a stack of books. That was my instructions, and I would come home, and he would be so happy that I'd brought him books, and I felt like I had done the right thing. I'd done a good job, and so that was that mastery motivation. I did it, and I was motivated to do it again and again. And not only that, but I was motivated because I saw him reading, and that was meaningful for me. You know, my mother didn't have that. She wasn't a reader, but I got that from my father. So for me, the library was something that we shared together. It was a special place for us, a special thing that we did once a week.
And I could so understand. For me, it wasn't my father, it was my mother. And part of it, every Friday night, we knew that about 3 o'clock, after we got home from school and she gave us a snack, we were going to go. And we went, but for my mom, it wasn't so much the reading piece of it, because my mom, although she's literate and can read, she didn't know how to read English. So she allowed us to bring home the books. And what we did is actually sit around the living room, and, you know, all the books spread around. But we can only check out 3 books at a time, because she knew we couldn't read them all anyhow. But the important thing about it, because we knew that that was the time my mom was going to just sit with us, even if it was for half an hour, and we would all share books, and then she actually had us sometimes teach her some of the words, because she was also wanting to learn, and for her, English was what she was trying to learn. But again, the library was not only about going, but it was also about what my mom, I think there was an element of that. And just being able to share with her, I think, was really important. So.
Right. And so we both have very positive memories of what that was like for us. Not all of the folks that come into your family library space will have those kinds of positive memories. But what you're trying to do through creating relationships is to create those positive memories and positive expectations, not only in the minds of the parents, but especially in the minds of the children. They're your future customers. And so think about these relationships as something where you are creating special meaning. You're going to have different kinds of relationships with the different parents that come into your library. Sometimes they will not elicit positive emotions in you either. You may have some very difficult parents that come and want to take part in your programs, but you'll have a relationship with them as well. So, but the main point that we're trying to make here is that a relationship will have emotional connections. It will endure over time, and it has special meaning that will create memories, sometimes very vivid memories, for the people that you have relationships with. And again, you are involved in that work. As I mentioned, there are a couple of different relationships that you're going to be focusing on as families bring their children to take part in your early learning programs. One that you'll want to focus on is the relationship between parents or other caregivers and those babies and toddlers. And the relationships you see, your role first and foremost is to observe those relationships. Take note of what you're seeing and step back and think about what it must be like for the parent and what it must be like for the baby. Because in any relationship, everybody brings something to that relationship. It may not always be balanced, and that might be your role. You might see that someone is there trying to get out of the relationship. They're coming, they're not participating. Your role is to add that balance and try to draw them into the activities. But as you look at the parent and infant-toddler relationship, you're going to be seeing some infants and toddlers who are very typically developing. They're hitting their developmental milestones the way you would expect. They're doing all the things that you might predict. And then you're also going to see some infants and toddlers who bring with them individual differences, ranging from temperament. You might have very active children. You might have very quiet, very shy, very slow to warm up babies and toddlers. And you might also see a full range of development. So you might have babies and toddlers that are already starting to show special needs, some that have mobility problems, language or communication issues, and you're going to take note of that and try to accommodate and be welcoming to those individual differences. You'll also see in the parents that they're going to be at all different developmental places on the parenting spectrum. Some will be very comfortable in that role, and some will be as awkward as can be. And again, your role is to observe and wonder about what that might be like for those parents as they go through that. There's also the very important relationship that you will have with the parents. And in our minds, because this is such an important part of learning, those relationships are based on mutual respect, establishing trust, and thinking about how you're going to learn from those families what's most useful for them. And this is something you're really good at because you watch and you observe families all the time. And as we go to the strategy section, we'll talk a little bit more about some techniques for families that how you can connect with them, initiate and sustain those relationships. We wanted to offer up this very colorful pyramid and it's called a pyramid model for social emotional competence. And we're sharing it with you for two reasons. One is that it comes from a very important project that has a wonderful website that you might want to look at. And for shorthand, we call it the CEPHL project. But it's the project out of the Center on the Social and Emotional Foundations of Early Learning. And the website is on this slide. It's also on the resource list. But at this website, you'll find everything from vignettes, video clips. You'll find tools, tips, and techniques for promoting social emotional development in young children, including those children who have very difficult times with self-regulation, with connecting with other children, with doing those basic skills of sharing. And so this is a wonderful website for getting information about that. But the other reason we wanted to show you this pyramid, it might be very useful in thinking about your work in the Early Learning for Families project, because you're really functioning at multiple levels of this pyramid in promoting social emotional competence, both in yourselves, in the parents, and in the children. So for instance, that bottom layer about the effective workforce, you're engaging in ongoing learning about what it's like for parents to support their children's early learning. You're certainly nurturing early relationships, but you're also building high-quality environments. I know that some of you have already created family place libraries that are famous for being places where learning can actively go on. And those environments help parents, help children learn in the best way possible. You're also often going to be targeting specific supports that you might want to develop in parents or children. And these range from drawing people into an interaction to helping children develop self-control, better decision-making, or at the very top of the pyramid, there might be times when you say, you know what, I need to reach out into the community and bring in some consultants to help me think about what I'm seeing and help me think about different ways to help my parents move to the next level.
Right, Cindy, and just to add to, again, as you were talking about the pyramid, that it is all degrees of it. So sometimes you may be really focused on the environment because that's what you're targeting. Other times you might be focusing on the intervention because there's a safety or some immediate concern. So across the pyramid, and that might be also something to think about and share with your coworkers along the way about how do you use this and how do you think about the engagement with families and ongoing relationships.
So our point about showing you this pyramid is just to emphasize that in your building relationships with parents, it's multifaceted, and many of the things that you do are going to contribute to your being able to support relationships with parents. And it's not just about the way that you connect on an emotional level with those with the adults or with the children that come to your libraries. Okay. I've talked a lot, so I'm going to turn this over to Leticia in just a minute. But we wanted to frame this notion of creating relationships in two ways. One in the creating or the initiating of relationships, and then on how you sustain those relationships or keep them going. So I'm going to let Leticia cover these next couple of slides.
Right, and in terms of initiating relationships, one of the things that we certainly are aware is that the ALF project has been engaged in doing this already, and you have been changing your environments, you have been doing outreach in the community, and that really requires quite a bit, not only in terms of the environment and working with parents, but really thinking through the importance of that initiation, of how do you begin conversations with parents and the caregivers. And again, if you're already doing this, as you hear me point out some of the tips, continue to do so. If you're not, there might be some tools. I think it's also important that as we, meaning the ALF Network, also develop strategies and programs that you share lessons learned from each other, because you will be finding out along the way what works and what doesn't. So as we initiate conversations with parents, it's always important to think about what is the common ground. And the most common ground that you start off with is the child, because you all are invested as professionals working with families in the importance in supporting the development of the child. Of course, the parent is there too for multiple reasons, but that's something already to build on. The other piece is to build on, again, our interest, but we all engage in interest and engage parents by creating active communication, active listening. And that's something we all can practice. I don't think that we have everybody. In terms of active listening, we have to continuously practice on doing so. So we want to think about, how do we acknowledge families? How do we, when they walk in, we greet them and we smile? And that's going to largely depend on how we feel. Cindy has been talking about the importance of the relationship. Well, the relationship also means how we're coming into the relationship. That day might have been just a wonderful day. You got up in the morning, you came to work, and you had lots of energy, and so you were able to greet everybody that walked in. But by 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you're ready to go home, you have to pick up your own children, and that becomes a little challenging. So our affect changes, our mood changes. It's important then at that point to also think about and step aside for a bit and ask, hey, geez, I wonder what happened. How did I engage with this family that perhaps next time I need to try different? Some of you from your questions asked about the importance of what if the family doesn't come back. That may happen. It's not exclusive to the libraries, it's exclusive to all programs that are trying to help families. And sometimes we need to be able to ask families what will it take on an ongoing basis to come back. Do we have suggestion boxes? One of the points here is welcoming families into your program. And again, welcoming is an array of both verbal and nonverbal, from what's in the environment, as some of you I know have been changing your environments, creating maybe sections where it's only for infants. You're going through a transformation. But how do you also welcome families in a way that you are expressive? You know, one of the things that seems to work for me, I recently joined the gym, and when you don't show up, they send you a little card. Now, wouldn't that be great if the library sends the family and says, you know, I haven't seen you. When will you be coming back? that to me is a welcoming experience. And again, sometimes if you ask parents, they will tell you. The point that I think sometimes we're challenged is when they do give us feedback, are we making those changes? And they could be beyond us. We may want to, but other environments, other policies around us may actually limit us from that. So we have this tension about what we think is right for babies and we want to get there, and again, our own limitations. But I think the importance of the environment and keeping that in mind is very important, engaging families. I saw a lot of questions around cultural responsiveness, and that's something we often get asked upon. How do we respond to families around different languages, different values, different practices? I think one of the things we need to let ourselves off the hook. We're not experts, but the reality is if we want to also engage families in a meaningful way that are different from us, how do we partner with other community partners that have that experience, that is working with the Asian community, that is working with the Latino community, to bring them on board and ask them, will you come share some information about your organization? What seems to be working for you? You're not alone, and those are ways that you can gain practical strategies to do so. I think on another way is also how do we reflect our own images of those families in our community in our programs? Do we create pictures? Do we bring them in? Do we create bulletins where families can share their stories? It's really important to share stories and hear and listen, as we were mentioning. Asking questions, encouraging parents to ask us questions, putting in the suggestion box, but responding to them also. Parents are critical partners to our work, and we need to support them. And once we initiate conversations, I think the other layer to that is how do we sustain them? And as Cindy has been saying about the importance of the ongoing connection, well, relationships happen over time. And our degrees of relationships also varies over a continuum. So maybe a couple weeks, a couple months, you may have an intense relationship with one parent or a caretaker, and that may change. We don't know what's also happening but with them. So we need to ask them. We need to think about, what might be happening. Sometimes we also not need to ask anything and just listen and wonder with them and ask them. Because when we can actually ask the question and reflect on the content and think about the feeling, then we are creating nurturing connections. And the other piece is about thinking about connections and sustainability in those relationships is that there are changes with families because they themselves may have new members coming on board, which changes the dynamics of our connections. We ourselves are forming connections not only with the parents, but also our peers and other people, other customers in the library, so transitioning that. So in doing so, we are called upon to respond to many needs, including our own, and sometimes we forget our own. But I think it's also very important that we are aware of what's happening with ourselves. Why does this family trigger a certain feeling for us? We've tried and we tried, and all of a sudden they're the ones that, just seem not to listen. And I think those are wonderful opportunities for ourselves to grow. When I meet somebody, and even in our connection with Judy and other people of the ELF, I've changed my whole value system of the library in that, not that I didn't value them before, but I see them as a strategic partner in actually looking and supporting infants and toddlers. And you are our partners in doing so. And I bet that most of you are already engaged in the community, working maybe with child protective services, working with maybe even mental health, maybe even home visiting programs. And they themselves also have to learn your culture. So that's yet another dynamic. We were talking about cultural responsiveness. We have to be able to also understand organizational cultures when we're working across disciplines, because that's the type of work that families need to be supported. So the other question we had here is how do we talk about our programs to other library customers, to other staff, and other community members? And I think there are many, many ways that you can do that. And to begin with, some of them are also to share about the importance of the early years. That's a way of building ground. That's a way of building and sharing your knowledge base that you, across all the trainings that you've had, across the dialogues, across the webcasts that you've been having, are an opportunity to share information. You are a wealth of information. So we start with that. And again, being able to learn from other disciplines about how to support children. And we've had a lot of opportunities here to share some ongoing themes, but we also want to be able to turn it over to you to be able to look at and ask us around questions you might have heard around social emotional development, around some of the techniques. So Judy, I'm going to turn to you now for questions that we may have.
I have one major question that has underlined a number of inquiries by librarians in the field, and that is, Building relationships is something that we see as being important. But when I'm faced with 25 parents and their little ones, or 15 parents and their little ones, and we've got different temperaments, and we have different kinds of activities going on, how can I manage the variety and the representation from so many different cultures and interests and values?
That's a great question, Judy. And first, I would say enlisted help, because that is a lot of what you're having to do is, again, attend to a lot of array of themes. Not only the different attunements, the different temperaments of the children, but also other children, like you said. So I would start with who is there that can help me? And I think that the parents would welcome to be part of that. You know, I would encourage them to be part, to co-lead something with me. And I would, again, maybe even encourage parents to rotate as part of that. Cindy, do you have more to add to that?
Well, I would say, back to your point about let yourself off the hook a little bit, I think going into, when you sponsor a program, be clear about what you want to accomplish in that time you have together, so that if you're bringing in families, inviting them in for a 1 hour something, be clear and realistic about what you can accomplish. You're not trying to teach them everything there is to know about parenting in that period of time. You may just say to yourself, if I just have a time where parents can feel comfortable coming and feel comfortable enough to bring their babies to stay and be engaged with some of the materials I have out, I will have succeeded. So kind of know what you want to accomplish going into it. But I think you know, if you can know ahead of time a little bit about the various ages of children you can expect, and having things tuned into their development. Remember back to our slide about the critical periods and the sensitive periods. Know that you should have materials, if there are infants, that they can handle and crawl on and chew on. But for the older children, they really can tune into a story, or they can get involved in their own learning for 10 minutes and be pretty comfortable with it.
So being familiar with and knowing the developmental phases that the children are in and being prepared for that, and involving the group in supporting that and helping that whole process, whether it be turning to other parents or bringing in community members. How do you ask and reflect? Can you give us an example?
That's a great one. Ask and reflect. We ask, I'm wondering if you had. I'm wondering, how about, what's it like? Can you share a little bit more? So when you ask, you really want an open question that would elicit. And it really, again, I'm thinking about what it might have been like for you growing up if you're asking and wanting information about what it was like for that parent. I'm wondering what it's like to have a newborn. So those are some of the asking questions. And to reflect means to listen and to stop and not always give a response. I think to reflect also is to think about what other options we could present, and even checking in with the parent. What's it like that I asked you that question? And let them respond. So the parent may say, I didn't like that. Or what's it like when we covered a topic that it was around being intimate and sharing, and yet my culture says I don't share. So those are the type of questions when we do ask and the parent says, but I don't like to do that, or it's very hard for me, that we say, wow, okay, you know, I could see that's very hard. So the reflection piece is to actually mirror back what that person is saying. And sometimes that's a little challenging.
And so, for example, you're the librarian, and you've now 3 weeks in a row had a parent time, and you notice a parent coming every time, and she comes and she sits off to the side, but she's come 3 weeks in a row. And so part of the reflection is you're thinking about what you've seen, and you notice that this is what goes on, but she does come back. And so maybe the third or maybe even the fourth week, you go and sit next to her and be quiet for a moment, because her energy level is very quiet, and she's a very slow to warm up mom. So you have to go over and first of all match her energy level. and you sit and you be quiet with her for a minute and you say, I wonder what it's like for you to come every time and sit back. What's that been like for you? And she may have an answer or she may not. And then you might be able to say, you know, some of the parents are down there on the floor with their children. And you might say, you know, parents have different ways that they think children learn best. What do you think about how children learn best? What's some of the best way that we can, and you might find out that that parent thinks it's the silliest thing ever to play with their children. They may not have ever been in a situation where it was okay for parents to play. And so she comes in and she sees the other parents playing and she says, I can't believe they're doing that. And she said, I don't think children learn that way. I think children learn that way. I think children learn by being taught.
Right.
And so I'm waiting for the teaching to start.
Right, right. And that's the content and the feeling piece, you know. And again, the cultural lenses that we bring for ourselves. Our parents played with us very little. That was the kid stuff to do. They didn't see the important. Adults were with adults, and they shared different information. So we also have to model, because parents also, and ourselves as adults, sometimes our peers, when we engage them and we say, come and participate, because it feels a little different, you've never done, you're doing the hokey pokey in the library with a book and you're asking somebody to dance. I don't know how to dance, but how do we engage and sort of say, you know, it's okay, I feel silly too doing this. It's that content the content might be going on, and we might use ourselves in part of the reflection. I feel silly too when I do that, and it's fun. Perhaps try next time.
How do you get my need as the person that's presenting this program is to have that parent participate. So how do I facilitate that?
And I would say, Judy, as the librarian, you need someone to reflect with. Because you have an expectation that you're bringing to that relationship that may not be shared by anybody else but you.
True.
And you don't know that those parents aren't absorbing an awful lot in participating the way that they're able. So you're expecting, part of this reaching out into the community is to find somebody that you can sit down with and say, you know, I expected that when I put on this parenting activity, that the parents would be right in there with me. I thought that they would want to come in and play with those toys. I thought that they would want to take those books home. I thought they would come back the next week with stories about how it worked when they were home. I thought that's the way I thought it would go. And then you need to say, what was I thinking? Was that realistic? Is there a better way for me to do that? And have somebody that can reflect with you. You need a Leticia. But I think that is the part about reaching out into the community.
That's right.
One of the things that you talked about is those relationships that we're not comfortable with. You know, it's that oil and water feeling. Yes, they're families and they're coming into the library, but it's not the kind of personality that really I connect with. How do I get beyond it? Do you have a tip or two?
Well, I know Leticia will speak to this, but I just have to say, you would be a super person if you could connect with everyone in the same way. So again, I think thinking about our own expectations, you are going to have a different relationship with every human being you meet.
And absolutely, and that's important to acknowledge that sometimes we're having a mixed match. Just like we've been talking about the child and the parent. What happens when the child has a mismatch with the parent, et cetera? It's going to take some work. It's also going to require an inner strength from you, Judy, to be able to say, that parent just pulls these triggers. I'm not sure what those triggers are right now. Oh, but you know, I really don't like it when she comes in, she's always angry, and no matter what I do, she's always angry. So one, it's acknowledging your feelings, and that's important, understanding that that's difficult for you. I think, again, also is asking others, you know, can they be present maybe if they're available, or even being able to talk about it, because then you become intentional about trying to figure out how do you move through it. And sometimes, again, it's also about getting consultation from a mental health practitioner. We do that a lot. At work, they tease me because that is my background, and sometimes I'm always practicing, well, let's think about that. Let's reflect on this. And so part of it is also, how do we resolve? You know, what does that bring? What does that trigger from us? And sometimes we're not aware, but sometimes there's really deep underlying feelings for us about something. And part of our journey is to be available and kind of either talk to a professional about that, either seek consultation. Acknowledging that it's difficult and challenging is an asset, because that begins to bring an awareness to the situation, and then as you learn and walk through it, you begin to apply that to somebody else, to another situation, to your own personal relationships. Because if it happens with that parent, chances are it happens somewhere else.
Yes, we've seen it before.
Yes.
Right. And what you're trying to help parents do is reflect a little on their own parenting skill. Because ultimately, their behavior reflects on their children, in the sense that, remember, we're talking about how parenting can alter the way an experience plays out in a child. And so if you go to a parent, let's say it's a parent with a lot of energy, and they come in and they are really boisterous, and they're really raising the energy level beyond the point you really want it to go. And you might say to them, you know, you can always find something positive. I guess that's the other thing I want to say. You can always find something positive in a parent or in a child to comment on. And so to this parent, you might say, I love the way you come in here with so much energy, because it helps us all feel positive about this experience. And then say, and I've noticed that your child is very active. What is that like for you to have such an active child? I'll bet there are times when you just get tired out. And that could start a conversation about building control, building regulation, because maybe that parent has never been able to think about their own behavior either. And they want to be able to fit in with the rest of the people there. But the point is, they do come, they are there, and you want them to come back. So finding that one positive thing that gives you that little emotional connection is a really good start.
Well, I think that you've given us some really good tips, and certainly a foundation from which we can refer, and we need more. we need much more, and we're planning to continue more of the webcasts as we proceed in this coming fiscal year. So please expect that. Did you want to make some final comments?
I just would like to say, just in summary, that we have given you a lot of information today about early brain development, how early relationships and experiences influence the way that the architecture of the developing brain is formed, how you can participate in forming healthy relationships between parents and children, and our point about reaching out into community resources, not just to help in difficult circumstances, but to help parents connect with the community resources that are there for them, and that even our briefest contacts with parents can be helpful in building connections and networks for them. Leticia, anything else you wanted to add on that?
And again, I guess in closing comments, I just want to say congratulations to you, because as a network, you are doing phenomenal work, even to be thinking and reflecting on what is the reflection, what is the relationship, how do I convey that to others, and the mere fact that you have the interest and willingness to invite us to learn even more about this, I think is something that's admirable, and we certainly look forward to being your partners. And in closing, again, I was going to just mention that we have a common journey with 0 to 3 and the ALF network, and that is the infants and the young children and the benefits of families. And with that, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things I do want to remind you of is that the webcast will be archived on the ELF website. Simply click on Training and Web Events, and you can access it. And the evaluation form is right below your viewing window, so please complete that. Thank you very much, and thank you 0 to 3 for being such a wonderful, constructive partner for ELF.
Thank you.